Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong. I have a great book for you today. The book is called Evolving Ourselves from Penguin Press. The title's unusual, but essentially it means that we have done all we can, you might say, with natural evolution, and if we're going to evolve to longer lifespans, we're going to have to give evolution a little help. And so this book is talking about the brave new world that we will encounter in the next century or two, how we will grow organs in, I don't know, petri dishes or whatever to replace the ones that wear out. And we will be able to extend lifespans significantly thanks to the wonders of biotech research going on right now. We're going to be talking to Steve Gullans, who is co-author of this book, Evolving Ourselves. And so without wasting any more time on an introduction for the moment, let's talk to him. My first question to you is what's happening in 3D printing world? Because I invested a little bit of money, not a lot, but just a few thousand just to invest in the future as I saw it. And I did this about a year ago, and since then it's kind of crashed. So what's happening with the 3D printing market?
There are a couple of things. One is, as a life science person, 3D printing has come to printing tissues and organs in a very meaningful way. It's still in the research labs, but so it's not a place to make money today, but it's something to look forward to. There's a lot of very complex organs in our body, or even something as simple as bone or teeth. The idea of actually having a organ, as it were, say a tooth, printed using a 3D printer where the printers contains 3 different cell types and 3 different color wells is something that Tony Atala and many others have been exploring for probably 5 years now. And we can see that coming to fruition in the next few years. In the material science space, it is really exciting and active. And the things that have been holding it up have been speed and the different kinds of materials that can be used. And that is actually changing very quickly in front of us. In fact, there was a great speak at TED this year that just came out in the media that I saw a couple of weeks ago about a new 3D printing technique that will transform manufacturing.
And this was at TED Med? Where they do
TED, no, just a straight TED.
Just straight TED. Well, while we're talking about you were mentioning your background as a professor at Harvard. I invested in Harvard Regenerative Technologies, and I don't think it really has anything to do with Harvard, does it? Not directly.
No, that doesn't. No, I don't think so.
But they are the ones who developed a technique for creating for people who've had throat cancer, and they've created an esophagus that can be implanted, and I guess it's biosynthetic, you might call it.
Yeah, it's in humans. It has human cells. In general, these the custom-made bio-printed or biosynthesized body parts are something we talk about a great deal in the book that we recently published. And this is coming to fruition. In fact, the idea of designer drugs and designer cells is a theme that will emerge in the 21st century in a very, very meaningful way, and we're just at the very beginning of that. So the promise is exciting, but the follow-through in terms of large-scale implementation with lots of people is still early. And one of the biggest challenges remains the fact that this is really mom and pop kinds of operations today, the same way that in early days of chip manufacturing of transistors was very hand and laborious. This is still early days, and we're sort of at that stage today for life sciences.
Your book reminds me of a book I read probably 35 years ago called The Third Wave. And The Third Wave was by Toffler, and it predicted a future that was going to blow our minds. And your book is like that to me. It predicts a future that's going to be startlingly different from where we are now in a very short period of time, if all things work together as you might prophesy.
Yes, and so the book, well, it's largely viewed as a book of the future. 75 or 90% of it is actually a description of things that are going on today, either in clinical practice or on farms or in laboratories. And so it's not wishful thinking these things are coming. It's actually they exist today. It's just how they're going to be implemented in the real world. And the way we look at it at a high level is the 20th century was really the century of physics and chemistry and engineering, and we saw really a change in the language from A, B, C, D to ones and zeros. Mm-hmm. And those who participated in the ones and zero revolution were those who actually became the leaders at the end of the century. It drove most global wealth in terms of whether it was printing or manufacturing or even finance in every other industry. The countries, the companies, the geographical regions of America, Silicon Valley and Boston, or even individuals who adopted this new language were those who were really driving the new world. Our thesis in the book is that GATC is the new language of the 21st century that will be of the same magnitude, if not larger, because it will build upon the one and zero language. As Roy Amara, a great futurist, has said, and been quoted many times, we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And genomics is very much in that vein. The human genome was finished as a draft in 2000. That's 15 years ago. What do we have to show for it? In everyday lives, we don't have a whole lot. I mean, today they announced sequencing 2,000 people in Iceland. But what we're seeing in the lab and in elsewhere is the second wave. So now people are under-expecting what's coming. And, for example, the first gene therapy just came through human clinical trials, and there have been 2,000 human gene trials, by the way. But the first one was just approved 2 or 3 years ago, called Glybera in Europe. It's going to be a dam that breaks as we begin to take on childhood inherited diseases with these technologies. So this century is a very exciting one.
Will there come a time in the, let's say, next 20 years where you think it'll be common for people for a young couple who are going to have a baby, and they will go to a genetic lab and say, we want a child with blue eyes and we want a child who has brown hair, and et cetera, et cetera? Will you be able to choose from a menu of options?
So we already know some of the answers to that because we don't have to look back very far. In Darwin's day, there was one way to get pregnant, and it didn't always work. And there was also concerns about survival. So the subtitle of the book is Unnatural Selection and Nonrandom Mutation Will Affect the Future of Life. And the point is that we are now beginning to see both of these in play. Reproduction, there's more than a dozen ways to get pregnant right now. And in addition, the early days of in vitro fertilization were headlines in the paper fraught with extraordinary concerns about safety and ethical and moral concerns. We don't think a second thought about it now. It is considered as part. In fact, Apple announced they would allow women to freeze their eggs so they could use them later in their lives if they wanted to extend their career. So as we look forward to how these techniques are going to be influencing things, we're always faced with the same two questions. Is it possible and safe? And should we do it? And so those questions will persist, and we will debate them. In fact, there was a moratorium called this week by a group of scientists about editing, which there's new DNA editing technologies, editing embryo DNA. We should not do that now because we don't know the answers to the safety and the moral issues that stand ahead of us. But we will solve those.
And cloning remains a big problem. Well, not a problem, but at least an ethical dilemma for many, right? That we don't want. Are there any countries in the world that approve human cloning?
No, there's nowhere that I know of that approves it. That doesn't mean people wouldn't do it.
Yes.
Obviously, but because a lot of these things, unlike making a nuclear power plant, making cloning is actually practiced on farms with farm animals. It's not something that's impossible to do. And a lot of the life science technologies we're talking about are methods that bacteria use in their own living cells, and so we've extracted from them the ways to edit and copy and make things genetically. So this boundary between what you can do and what you should do is going to be challenged as we go along. The first round of this is really being implemented in designer bacteria that are probiotics, that are altering manufacturing, the with things, the way things are manufactured. Companies like DuPont and others have begun to use living cells, bacteria, to make fine chemicals, to make materials for fabrics. And in addition, we're looking to algae to make biofuels directly rather than going through the process that we currently do of mining it out of the ground. So there's lots of biological systems that will be very powerful in a designer method that will help mankind.
Well, since you deal with the future and you think about the future a lot, what do you think 100 years from now is going to look like that would be startling to us today?
I'm asked this question a lot, and it's really driven in large part by sort of two influences. What is it that makes life better for the individual, and what is it that makes life better for society? And I'm speaking as an optimist and a benefit, someone who's worked in a health context. There are always Malthusian naysayers who are doom and gloom people, and you can put it in that context as well. But let's talk about the favorable side. Now, on the side of the individual, you're always seeking to make life better for yourself, live longer, live a healthier life, be aware of what your future is, and extend things in ways that benefit you. Now, this moves from health into wellness and even into performance and other things over time. And so at an individual level, each person will decide, do I want a designer baby, yes or not? And that is not available today. People who say it will be is still a long ways off. To do the first gene therapy, again, took 30 years of DNA testing with 2,000 human trials. We have done, I think, 4,000 stem cell trials. We still don't have, aside from bone marrow transplant, we don't have a true stem cell therapy out there. So it's going to be a while. But the ability, once it's safe, to select to eliminate traits as an individual will be decided. Now, at a society level, things are also, there are pressures today to vaccinate everyone. It's viewed as good for society. We're having this first debate with measles vaccine of, if I as an individual don't want it, 50 years ago it was God's decision whether I died of measles or not.
I like that.
Now it's... Yeah. Now I can decide. I can decide, you know what, I'm willing to take my chances. But society is pressuring us to get this for the right reasons because of this herd vaccination approach. Now, what if it becomes, living to 100 is viewed by society as a benefit because of a number of reasons, or being healthy to 100? Would an individual who decides they don't want to get a simple gene infection be someone who's ostracized, someone who's pushed? What about, wrinkles? We now accept Botox as an everyday treatment. What other beauty treatments, blue eyes you bring up, is something that is disappearing by natural selection and natural interactions? But if you wanted to choose it, and you could turn it on and off, for example, should you choose it for your children? Maybe blue eyes will grow veins. So you're asking about 100 years from now. I don't know what will be trendy in terms of personal individuals, but there will be some abilities to make individual selections. There will also be group events. People always congregate with like-minded people. The worst thing would be if everybody wanted identical lives going forward. Everybody was the smartest, the fastest, and whatever.
That would be boring.
I think we will see. Right now, we're 99.9% identical at the DNA level. But we choose to wear different clothes, we choose to get tattoos, we choose these things. I think we will choose to have different outcomes in terms of our epigenomes, the food we eat that's been modified in the future. Now, what will we do as society? I'm not 100% sure. And one last point is, with the singularity and the discussion of Kurzweil of machines getting smarter than humans. One thing that has not been considered, and I was at the TED conference last week where AI was going to overtake the world, was a debate. We have not considered the fact that humans are going to be co-evolving with these technologies, and the ability to interface with them and leverage them through biological digital interface systems, which are currently being explored at MIT and other places, will come to fruition. And so the idea of, do you want an upgrade that's not just biological changes, but some silicon changes or some carbon changes? I don't know. I think we will see those things in the next 100 years.
I interviewed a guy about 3 months ago who had written a book on freezing your body for 200 years from now, or whatever. So a cryogenic solution to maybe, you have some untreatable illness now, and so you freeze yourself, and with the idea that maybe 500 years from now they can unfreeze you and fix you. Do you think that's nuts?
I think the desire for that is not nuts. I think the way it's actually manifested, if it is, will be different. I mean, we describe this in the book. The idea of taking your DNA and freezing that and reconstituting it in the future, and the idea of downloading your memories into some place to store them is not out of the realm of possibility either. It's sort of what constitutes many aspects of your existing brain. So the idea of reconstituting someone in the future who is alive today is certainly within the realm of possibility. Now, how actually someone eventually decides to do this, I think, is open for debate. And if we look back 100 years or 200 years ago to what life was like and someone trying to envision trying to be alive today, how would they have looked at it? I mean, would they really want those crummy teeth or everything else? And would they really fit into today's world, or be totally panic-stricken by the noise and the traffic and the world we live in these cities? I'm not sure you actually want to bring today's person ahead into the future in the way they're constituted today.
That's a brilliant point. I hadn't thought of that before. Well, the other thing I wonder about is, will we actually live longer in the future? I mean, given that we're kind of killing ourselves with our own successes. We know how to make food more than ever before. There's more food available for us, at least in this society, than ever before. And we don't know how to say no to it. So we're fatter. And so won't we die younger?
Yes. I mean, if you go to a conference on aging, what you soon discover is that you and I, it's too late for us, because all of the research focuses on stopping aging, not reversing it. Right? And if you took a 95-year-old, if you couldn't reverse anything, really want to stay alive for another 1,000 years in the current mode we're living.
Yeah, that would. It's not pretty.
So perhaps a better way of looking at it is to say there will be a generation that does not age but dies, which will be followed at some point by a generation that has the decision of not aging and not dying. And the form in which that comes is, it's either going to be a reconstitution of your organs or a reinvigoration of something. But we will take control enough of life in terms of understanding it to be able to envision those things coming. I have no problem with that. We will push longevity, we'll push wellness way beyond where it is today. Living a healthy life to 100 is well within our grasp in terms of the science we know today. Living a healthy life to 200, I can't see today in terms of the science I've seen. And preventing dying, I can dream of the technologies, but they're not currently available. But I can see that, given how far we've come in the last 20 years with life sciences and other technologies, it seems inevitable.
Have you seen the movie Chappie?
No, I haven't.
Well, I wouldn't expect that you've had time, but and it's not a great film, but it has elements of greatness, you might say, and making you think outside the proverbial box. And one of the things they do in it is a guy dies, and they're able to upload his memories and consciousness, his self, into a robot. And so he is eternal by virtue of this ability to transfer his mind like you would in any memory file in a computer. And what I was surprised is they were able to do it with 5 terabytes of data. So I think it would take more if you were going to actually get everybody's whole self in there. But, I mean, is that something that you see as possible in the far future? Or is it just... and I know it's hard to predict the future because you never know what new technologies are going to come along or what new theories are going to give us insights we've never had before. Right. But based on what you know now, do you say that's just absolutely impossible?
There's people working on that already. There was a TED Talk last week by Martine Rothblatt, who's an author and started Sirius and has this biotech company, United Therapeutics. And she's actually begun to do this with some of the existing technologies out there to embed with AI and other approaches. Now, whether it's a combination of AI and computers in terms of storing memories and holding them, or a life sciences cell-based thing, what remains to be seen. But there seems to be a desire to hold the present and not accept changes for the future.
Yes.
So I know the desire is there now, but in general, that has not persisted. The new generation wants to create their own destiny. Mm-hmm. Now, whether living for a very long time means you don't want things to change, mm-hmm. Will probably be a subset of society. I'm sure we have the Amish who still live a very very old lifestyle in a modern world.
Well, there's as I was reading your book, I was also thinking of Marshall McLuhan, who wrote about technology 3 decades ago, and he said that all technology was designed to extend the human senses. We invented a telescope so we could see further, and we invented a bicycle so we could travel faster. And so as I was reading your book, I was thinking about that a lot of what we're doing is we're trying to extend our brains, we're trying to extend our life. And so the title of your book ties into that metaphor for me, that we have evolved biologically a long way, but it's too slow. And so through technology, we can evolve ourselves quicker. Is that right?
Absolutely. And extending our senses is a very natural one. I mean, the idea of increasing the light spectrum or the odors we can smell, those we understand the basic elements of it. Dogs have more odor receptors than we do, so they can smell more things.
And I don't know why, if they can smell more, I don't know why they're smelling the stuff they smell.
I agree with that. But we actually, the repertoire of molecules that the human can smell, I think it's over 1 trillion, but our sensitivity to detecting just a few molecules is not as good. Mm-hmm. And so there's different ways of doing that. And the idea of brand new senses that don't exist, integrating multiple senses or converting touch into smell or smell into touch, so that you actually feel it can find, in big data, you can actually feel where the needle in the haystack is. Those are things that we talk about, and maybe they will work out. And in the world, when they first come to fruition, the question is always, what's the killer app? What's the one thing that gets people to want to do this in a way that's meaningful rather than just a novelty? And that we don't know yet. We'll have to see how that works out.
What's the most amazing thing you've seen in your lifetime? Technologically, biologically?
I think that the most amazing things I've seen have been techniques dealing with single molecules. I've seen the collider at CERN, which I thought was just amazing to see this thing underground. It was saw that last spring or last fall, where humanity has actually explored single subatomic particles. And so it's this nano scale that has really intrigued me, that things that we couldn't even imagine existed in Darwin's time, we're actually looking at it. And now with the transition to being able to use them, design them, and invent them, I think we have a whole new world to explore. And I love the cross-connection when I get an engineer in the same room with a big thinker on what might be possible, and you start to think about how to put it together. So,
one last question, since you're in the midst of this revolution. Where do you put your money for investing in this revolution? What sorts of companies? I mean, I guess you have your big biotechs like Biogen and Amgen, et cetera.
Right.
So would you suggest for someone, I know you're not a financial advisor, but you just throw your money toward a good mutual fund that has a lot of these biotech companies? Or are there 2 or 3 small ones that will be the Apple of biotech in 15 years?
So it depends on your time horizon. I'm actually a partner in a venture fund now where I make biotech investments. That's what I left Harvard for, because
that's why I'm asking you.
In the world requires more than just smart people. It requires a little capital.
A lot of capital.
And so the near-term, short-term horizon in the American therapeutics community has really been about cancer and orphan diseases. That's where all the big IPOs have been, and that's where all the excitement is right now. We're actually investors in antibiotics company because we felt that there was a shortage of antibiotics. And that's a great place to be. But in the longer term, it's really there's going to be several trends that come along. One is going to be around the ability to read, write, and edit DNA code in human diseases, manufacturing, and agriculture. Those and energy as well, but the energy markets are a little unclear at this moment with regard to pricing. But as the cost of making, synthesizing, altering DNA come down, the big longer-term trends, I'm talking 10 years. We're investors, for example, in synthetic genomics. Craig Ventures companies where he's using modifying DNA to change the energy markets. These are disruptive technologies that will become trillion-dollar companies in enormous segments of the economy outside of healthcare. And so it's really these fundamental technologies about editing, making, manufacturing, scaling DNA and life organisms.
Well, I'm so happy you pointed that out because I tended to think of it as restricted to healthcare, but you show there's a significant market outside of that we need to think about as well.
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yes, I enjoyed it enormously, and plus I think you made me some money, so that's even better. All right, you have a great day. We've been talking with Steve Gullans. The book is Evolving Ourselves. If you'd like to hear this interview again, you can get it on our Facebook page, Good Books Radio, or you can get it on our YouTube channel, Good Books Radio. I've been your host today, Dr. W.F. Strong. Hope you've enjoyed it. I'm signing off and hoping that all your books are good reads.